The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, March 13th, 2019. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Rutger Bregman, Dutch popular historian and author, on his latest Utopia for Realists. Also on the program today, America shocked that people buy their way into elite universities. Also on the program today, 670,000 people in Puerto Rico have food stamps cut. Meanwhile, Republicans look to do a one-off on that Trump emergency order, and the Trump administration to close international immigration offices across the globe. Is this the Boeing 737 failure a function of privatization? And Republicans advance a judicial nominee who blamed date rape on drunk women to a lifetime appointment. Gavin Newsom to impose a moratorium on the death penalty in California. Paul Manafort to impose a greater moratorium on his ability to be a free person. Republicans look to folks to mortgage their retirement, and Dave Rubin had a blog. All this and more on today's program. Yes, folks, welcome to the program. I guess I don't know what happened to me. That there are times like I'm so used to hearing the opening of the show that I can't hear it. Like I was literally waiting for.
I was looking at the board like, is there something wrong?
I was waiting for the opening to play, and I just didn't hear it. So apologies, ladies and gentlemen, for my little brain freeze there. Just a reminder, this program relies on your support for its daily operations. You can become a member by going to jointhemajority.report.com for just pennies a day. And, of course, also justcoffee.coop, fair trade, coffee, tea, chocolate, coupon code majority, you know the rest. Let's get into this. Last night, I was on Chris Hayes' program with Michelle Goldberg, and we were talking about impeachment. And this coming largely, or at least initially, from an interview that Nancy Pelosi did. And now I can't remember where it was done, but it was a print interview. And she was asked about impeachment. She said, no, I'm not going to even bother. You know, why bother with that guy, et cetera, et cetera. Then she was asked about impeachment again on the Hill, and this is what she had to say.
I just don't believe in it. They wanted me to impeach President Bush for the Iraq War. I didn't believe in it then. I don't believe in it now. It divides the country unless there's some conclusive evidence that takes us to that place. Thank you.
Now, let's just for a moment put aside unless there's some type of conclusive evidence, right? In other words, unless like we have Donald Trump on camera, and I have said this for 2.5 years, He will not be impeached unless there is videotape of him stark naked on the White House lawn chasing around a little boy.
And I think we can all conclude now that that also is not true. He would still not be impeached.
Well, I don't. It's conceivable, but and last night Hayes literally questioned whether if there was evidence that he had shot a man to death, would the Republicans impeach him? I would say no.
In the middle of Fifth Avenue, perhaps.
Right, indeed, and so. But putting aside the fact that she said conclusive evidence, which I'm not sure exactly how you get conclusive evidence without any type of investigation short of that scenario. First off, to brag about not impeaching George W. Bush, who not only lied this country into war, not only was involved in the outing of a CIA agent for the sake of maintaining that lie, right? Understand that maintenance of the lie, protecting the fact that there was a lie, is evidence of knowledge that they're lying. That's what a prosecutor would look at. This is the state of mind is proven by the fact they're trying to cover it up. And that's what that was. That was an attempt to cover up the fact that they had lied about the potential for uranium yellow cake to be there. But then, of course, you've got torture. There's a whole nother. In fact, back in the day, I moderated a panel at Town Hall. John Conyers showed up with a book 10 inches thick, maybe a foot thick, of possible impeachment causes. So to brag about that is indicative of the fact that, and then to simply say it's a waste of time, it's divisive. I think there's certainly arguments as to why you would not do this politically, and it's certainly predictable. 2 years ago, I was not just saying that the Republicans wouldn't convict in the Senate in a million years, but that the Democrats would much rather run against a wounded Donald Trump than an impeached one. But the problem with the way that Pelosi is responding to this ignores the fact that impeachment is important. Laying down a marker saying what Donald Trump has done in office, whether it involves the personal enrichment, whether it involves the campaign finance violations, this is all, incidentally, while in office. Whether it involves the fact, the guy was identified in an indictment as a co-conspirator, where his co-conspirator is going to jail in the next couple of weeks for years. So there is no doubt that there has been criminality. Certainly criminality that rises above the idea of lying in a deposition about having sex 4 years into office after the start of an investigation about something that happened 12 years earlier. But forget the tit for tat thing. Donald Trump is in office, at least in part because of the complete lack of accountability that our government held folks like Steve Mnuchin to, but also the Bush administration. Even if there was an attempt to impeach Bush in 2007 and it failed, even if there was a move to look back and provide indictments or a commission to report back on what George Bush did in office and set down a marker, and nothing happened to George Bush, it would have been better for the country. It would have shown that there is some accountability for people who break the law. And I do think that, I don't think that the Democrats can impeach or should impeach before the election. And here's why. The most compelling reason in my mind is we all know that they will not get a conviction in the Senate. And I balance this against the notion of accountability, which is why the rhetoric here is so important. But if they impeach Donald Trump in 2019, or in the summer of 2020, and he wins re-election, they will not have a second bite at that apple. And you will have Donald Trump in office for 4 years, basically, I think in his mind, to his death or as close as you can get, without the threat of removing him from office, with it gone. So all bets are off. I mean, this is, as I said on Hayes last night, as a metaphor. You need to keep at least a bullet in the chamber, because otherwise you're in big, big trouble if he wins re-election, because he's going to know there's no danger for him whatsoever. But the response by Nancy Pelosi should not be impeachment's a waste of time, impeachment's divisive, impeachment's irrelevant. It should be, we can't impeach because the Republicans are protecting a lawbreaker. And we will hold hearings and we will line up indictments and wait to when it's practical to actually get this conviction, because he is engaged in criminality and he must be held accountable. This is crucial, and it is a huge failure on her part to poo-poo the idea of accountability, which is what she's doing when she poo-poos the idea of impeachment.
Yeah, like, shouldn't that be a selling point for people to vote more Democrats into the Senate, maybe?
Well, I mean, I think from her perspective, I mean, I don't want to argue the politics of it, because I think it could go either way, but it could also be an inducement for people to vote, to vote against the Democrat, to vote against Trump and mobilize Republicans to vote the Senate. And the Senate's going to be very difficult for Democrats to get. So, I mean, I think there is a legitimate argument that Republican voters can be, at this point, motivated by stopping Nancy Pelosi. But you simply say, don't use it as a direct pitch. You simply get the narrative out there that Republicans are protecting lawbreaking. Period. End of story. The practicality of this is the problem. You don't go out if you don't have enough police officers. You don't try and raid a drug cartel and put everybody in danger. And that is where we're at. We know there's a lawbreaker. We know where he lives. We know how to go and arrest him. The problem is the Republicans are sitting there and they have more guns and they're going to prevent us from going in.
That is a very good metaphor. He's basically Pablo Escobar without the Horatio Alger story.
Exactly. And he's also got this whole crew of people who are part of a Republican Party, which breaks down the metaphor a little bit. But folks, unless, of course, you have pipes banging in your apartment, and I'm not going to get into that, there is no need to suffer through another sleepless night thanks to Calming Comfort by Sharper Image. The luxurious weighted blanket is made with super soft velveteen material and designed with high-density comfort fill to promote a sense of calmness. Plus, by applying an even amount of pressure over your body, Calming Comfort helps the production of serotonin and melatonin and mimics the soothing feeling of being hugged for a restful night's sleep. Hello. I can tell you, what do you mean, hello? What's that supposed to mean? I can tell you, I have one on my bed right now. And when Saul comes in the morning to wake me up earlier than he should, the whole hour ahead thing is really messed everything up in my house. He and I fight for the blanket, because it really does help you sleep, and it's incredibly relaxing. Calming Comfort weighted blanket. I think that's because it mimics the way you were, I think, in the womb. Oh, wow. That's what the one thing they tell you when the kid comes out. You swaddle them you wrap them in a blanket, like a papoose for. I can't remember how long we did it. Not long enough. Just do it for, I don't know, years probably. The Calming Comfort weighted blanket comes with a 90-day anxiety-free, stress-free, best night's sleep of your life guarantee from Sharper Image. Right now, our listeners can go to calmingcomfortblanket.com and use the promo code MAJORITY at checkout to receive $15 off the displayed price. Again, that's calmingcomfortblanket.com, promo code MAJORITY, because you can't put a price on a great night's sleep. calmingcomfortblanket.com, promo code MAJORITY. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Rutger Bregman will be joining us to talk about Utopia for Realists, to talk about his call for more taxes at Davos, and from his moment on Tucker Carlson, which he had to share with us because Tucker Carlson refused to. We'll be right back after this. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program Rutger Bregman, Dutch popular historian and author, publisher of 4 books. His most recent, Utopia for Realists. Rutger, welcome to the program.
It's great to be with you.
Now, first off, I have to just ask you, for best practices, to make sure that you're not recording this on your end.
Oh. No, I'm not recording anything, I promise.
Okay, well, that's fine. We're live anyways. So
yeah, okay.
But I had to do that. We had a lot of we got a lot of enjoyment from your exchange with Tucker Carlson, and I'd like to touch on that in a bit. But first, I want to start with your book, which is fascinating to me for a number of reasons. One, because you were writing about this book was first published in 2017, at a time when I think there was a lot less discussion of things like UBI, and there's been a lot of in many respects there's been big changes in just the past year or two, sort of in the realm of what you're talking about. But I want to start with this idea of, and in some ways you build in the conservative critique that we hear about people's desire for progress right now when we talk about things like wealth inequality, and when we talk about perfecting society in some way, or improving, I guess I should say, which is that we are living in an unparalleled age of stuff, and of throw out some of the parallels you make to like where we are, where your average person is today relative to where they would have been in 1850, for instance.
Exactly. This is important to recognize. We've made extraordinary progress in the past 200 years. Every milestone of civilization that we're used to right now was once a utopian fantasy, right? So whether you think about the end of slavery, or democracy, or equal rights for men and women, we've made the impossible happen so many times. And that's what progressive politics should be about, you know? Aim high and come up with all those unreasonable, crazy, unrealistic proposals, because they may become reality in that way in the future.
And you write that the failure of the welfare state at this point has been to address the symptoms of the discontent rather than the source of the discontent.
Mm-hmm.
Expand on that for us.
Sorry, I missed you there.
Okay, yeah, we had a little bit of a hiccup. You wrote.
Sorry.
It's okay. You wrote that that the failure of the modern welfare state, despite the fact that we have all of these advances when it comes to, fighting poverty, to things like nutrition, things like, advances in terms of wealth and whatnot, that the failure of the current welfare state is that it deals with the symptoms of the discontent rather than the source of it. Expand on that for us.
Yeah. So take poverty, for example.
Oh, you're breaking up.
You'll find out.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Rutger. Can we ring you right back? We're having a little problems with connection.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, we'll call you right back.
All right.
It sounds like maybe Rupert Murdoch does have a little bit more power than we could imagine.
Indeed.
Okay, so let me just restate. You've written that the welfare state, despite all the advances, deals with the symptoms of our discontent as opposed to the source of our discontent. Just expand on that and explain what you mean by that.
Sure. Well, if we talk about something like poverty, I think the most important thing we should recognize that poverty is not a lack of character, but just a lack of cash. So in my book, I go over all the evidence we have from economics, from all sorts of experiments that happened since the 70s that show that eradicating poverty by just giving people money, going at the root of the problem and solving it with this medicine called money, works really, really well. But so often what we're doing in practice is that we're, trying to do something about the symptoms, right? We invest in education, all these courses that are supposed to help people make better decisions. That's not really solving the real issue, which is that poverty is just a lack of cash. And in so many cases, we should just hand out the salaries of the people that are trying to help the poor, because the real experts on the poor's lives are the poor themselves. It's just that they don't have the money.
Let's talk a little bit about the and you give a considerable amount of, at the very least, data and evidence. Let's talk about what you call Minkum Canada, which I think I think maybe to a certain extent we've talked about a little bit or touched on on this program. But tell us about the experiment in Canada, and which I don't think most people realize. There was also experiments in this country with simply paying poor people money so they won't be poor.
Yeah, not many people know that at the end of the 60s in the United States, almost everyone believed that some form of guaranteed basic income was going to be implemented. Everyone was in favor of it, from the left to the right. At some point there was a letter in the New York Times signed by 1,000 economists who all said, we got to end poverty in this country. And then in the early 70s, Richard Nixon, of all people, said, what? If everyone's in favor of this, let's do it. It's a pretty bizarre history. This bill went through the House of Representatives twice, and it was only killed in the Senate by Democrats, not because they didn't like the idea of eradicating poverty, but because they wanted a higher basic income. So yeah, this is a pretty fascinating history. It was also in this period that in North America, you had as much as 5 big basic income experiments. And indeed, one of them was, as you mentioned, in this small town in Canada, the Minkum Experiment.
Well, tell us a little bit about that experiment.
Okay, so this started in 1974. A big experiment, a town where poverty was just completely eradicated. So as soon as you fell below the poverty line, your income would be automatically topped up. Now, there were lots of anthropologists and economists and sociologists who all moved into that town to monitor the effect. And they gathered a lot of data, did a lot of interviews for 4 years. But after 4 years, there was a problem. A new government was voted into power, and they didn't really like the experiment, or the idea of just giving people free money. So what they did is they canceled the whole thing, and there was no money left to analyze the results. So there were 2,000 boxes full of data that had to be put away in the archive, and then basically everyone forgot about it. So 25 years passed until a professor called Evelyn Forget found the records, did the analysis, and found out that actually it was a huge success.
And by huge success, what are the measures that we're using to determine that? Okay,
a couple of things. So in the first place, a lot of people worry that if you would just give people free money, that they'll just stop working. Now, this is simply not true. So in all the experiments, you see hardly any reduction in work hours. And if there's a little bit of a reduction, it is always compensated by people doing more volunteers work, or caring for the children or caring for the elderly. So that's not something to worry about. And then you've got all the other positive effects, like healthcare costs went down. So the hospitalization rate in Dauphin, this town that I was talking about, dropped by as much as 8.5%. Crime went down. Kids doing much better in school. So the interesting thing here, and this is something that researchers actually found from a similar experiment in North Carolina, is that basic income can be an investment that pays for itself in the long run, because the reductions in healthcare costs and policing costs, etc., are bigger than the cash grants themselves. So yeah, it doesn't really matter if you whether you're left wing or right wing. I always say that if you don't have a heart, then at least you have a wallet. It makes financial sense as well.
And one of the and I want to touch on in just a moment some of the fascinating history about Nixon, because in addition to the Democrats wanting more, there was another narrative that got developed out of that time inadvertently by Nixon, you write, and I want to touch on that in a moment. But in terms of the policy itself, to what extent, though, and this has been, to the extent that I've heard any critiques of a UBI from the left, it has been a concern of the politics that in some way we saw with Dauphin, which is that you could, folks like Milton Friedman wanted to institute a UBI or guaranteed basic income, and as a replacement for other forms of support for people living in poverty. And the concern is that if you put all the eggs in that one basket, the ability of that basket to shrink, depending on the political winds, is difficult.
Well, I really see basic income as a directional thought. And there are many, many different versions of basic income. Very exciting and, hopeful. And some of them are just a really bad idea. You have this libertarian version of basic income, which is all about, getting rid of the welfare state as we have it now and just supplanting it with one small cash grant. And don't get me wrong, I think that would be a horrible idea. I mean, I'm from Holland. I know that universal healthcare is a pretty great thing. And public education is also a pretty great thing. So a guaranteed basic income would really be supplement, it would be the crowning achievement of social democracy. So yeah, it's the devil's in the details here. It's important to look at that.
Okay, and so tell us about what Nixon did. I mean, it was fascinating, the idea that he wanted to be the conservative who makes this sort of like highly progressive leap forward, but in his rhetoric, he ended up sort of creating another monster.
Yeah. Well, it's a good example that, if you zoom out a little bit and look at the broader span of history, you just realize that it's really ideas that matter in the long run, right? So it's really hard to imagine right now that at the early 70s, it was this conservative president almost implementing this seemingly radical progressive idea. Now, what happened in that process in the 70s is that it's a pretty bizarre and complicated history. But to summarize it quite quickly, is that Nixon heard something about a report of a sort of basic income-ish-like experiment that happened in the early 19th century, actually, in England, where supposedly they had some kind of basic income that didn't work at all. And that sort of convinced him to change his language. So he started to use the language of workfare, as opposed to welfare. And he started talking a lot about the lazy poor and about the lazy, people who are out of job. And, that was later taken up by Reagan as well. And then we moved into a totally different era. What I've learned from all of this is that history is not governed by big laws, and often it's not governed by, the vested interest either. But coincidences matter a lot, and ideas as well.
So he looks at Speen Hamland in England.
In England,
and thinks that workfare is going to be the easiest way to get this guaranteed basic income in, and it ends up all that we get from that is this notion of the premise of workfare, that you need to motivate people to work. Let's talk about your other proposal, and that comes from in part, I guess, maybe the Jetsons, in part from Bertrand Russell, the idea of a 15-hour work week. Explain that to us.
Okay, so this idea, it basically goes back to the famous British economist John Maynard Keynes, right? So in 1930, he wrote an essay called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. It's a fascinating read. You can just Google it, Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, and your mind may be blown, because he made two predictions in that essay. It's just 8 pages long, where he said, in the first place, we're going to be a lot richer, right? So if economic growth continues as it has been, as we've seen it since the 1850s, we'll be a lot richer. And if we just use a little bit of that wealth every year to work a little bit less, then the work week will keep shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and we'll be working less and less and less. And if you then just extrapolate, we'll have a 15-hour work week in 2030. That was Keynes' prediction, one of the great economists of the 20th century. Now, you could say, I never really liked Keynes anyway, he was this crazy guy. But actually, almost all the experts, all the sociologists, the philosophers, up until the 70s, they all believed that we would be working less and less and less. It's only since around the 1980s that we started working in a hell of a lot more.
Well, what happened? I've spoken on this program about finding an article in a steamer trunk at a yard sale from a futurist, I think it was in the early 60s, addressing a Rotary Club in Florida, talking about how we're all going to be carrying around little TVs, which was accurate. We're going to get beam stuff from the space. He thought at the time they would be powered by kerosene, but so you can't get everything right. But he did say the biggest challenge we're going to have by the year 2000 is what to do with our leisure time, because of the amount of work that we would not need to do. So what happened? I mean, this is what you call, many respects, I think what you call the great decoupling. But what happened?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. What we underestimate is capitalism's extraordinary amount, or extraordinary ability, I should say, to come up with new bullshit jobs that simply don't need to exist. To be honest, I can already see this, as someone from Holland, where workers are better protected and we've got a higher minimum wage. You see so many jobs in America that just don't exist in Holland, right? Greeters at a supermarket, so much security, that's not really necessary in my mind, right? So capitalism is really good at inventing all these jobs that don't really need to exist. Now, if you don't believe me, you can ask people themselves, right? We've seen huge polls in the past couple of years. There's now a scientific study done by 2 Dutch economists where they ask people the question, do you think your job adds anything of value to society? Turns out 25% of the modern workforce says, no, I don't add anything of value to society. I could go on strike and no one would care. Now, who are these people? well, they're not teachers, they're not nurses, they're not care workers. Actually, they're often people with wonderful resumes who went to great universities, who work for banks or for consultancies or you name it. But still, at the end of the day, they have this feeling like my job doesn't contribute anything.
Well, so what? Why is it, in your estimation, is that capitalism in the context of the United States develops these bullshit jobs? I mean, I think we had Graeber on to talk about this some time back. Why do you think it is? I mean, has that been the answer, as opposed to, like, what are the forces that create that dynamic?
Well, I don't think it's about technology or about economics. It's really about ideology. If you have this ideology that goes back to the 19th century, which is all about you have to work for your money, and where we use a very narrow definition of what work actually is. So you have to be in a hierarchical relationship with an employer, and you pay, you get a salary, you pay taxes over that. And that's the only thing we consider work, right? We do not include caring for our kids in GDP. We do not include caring for the elderly in GDP, right? Or all kinds of other volunteers work. Now, if you have this ideology, this belief system about everyone should do this kind of work, and then there's suddenly no work left anymore, right? Because the robots are coming, they're taking more and more jobs. Then you get into this crisis, this ideological crisis, and you just start inventing jobs that don't need to exist. I think that is exactly what we've seen happening in the past couple of decades. And if you want to see what the future can look like, I think you should go to a country like Japan, because Japan has the most robots per capita, right? It's the most technologically advanced society in the world, probably. But then the unemployment rate is the lowest in the whole rich world as well. So how do they do it? Well, you just walk around in Tokyo for a couple of hours and you'll see so many jobs that don't need to exist, right? There are roadworks and there are literally 10 people standing next to it, waving to, go to the left, go to the right. It's absolutely useless. But that's what happens if you have this ideology that everyone needs to have a job.
Well, so where does, what is the ideology? Is that a function of capitalism? I mean, it's clearly not just puritanical, or maybe it is, and somehow we exported that to Japan. Is it just a function of capitalism? And what does...
No. Communism had it as well, right? So if you went to the Soviet Union, there was also this ideology that everyone should have a job, right? And you would go to... a bakery or something, and you would buy a piece of bread, and there would be someone to give it to you, someone to hand you over the receipt, someone to put it in a bag, right? And just because there's this ideology, we all need a job. I think that's what we need to get rid of. The real goal of the future should be, as one science writer once said, the real goal of the future should be full unemployment, so that we can live the good life, right? That should be the promise of technological progress.
I mean, in some respects, there's a failure of culture too, right? Because there is not enough of a competition for that time. I mean, you mentioned how much people watch TV. I think specifically in this country, but certainly you quote Bertrand Russell. The idea that we don't really, that our leisure time is really just a way to regenerate for work, as opposed to the development of a rich cultural life that makes pursuing things that aren't for work as easy as sort of like almost like second nature as the idea of like entering the workforce.
Yeah, I agree. But here's the interesting thing. If you compare countries internationally, and you look at the countries with the longest work weeks, those are also the countries where people watch the most amount of television, right? Because they worked so hard, and then at the end of the day, the only thing you can do is sit back and watch stupid cable news, right? And be brainwashed. If you look at the countries with much shorter working weeks, you'll see that they're also the countries where people go to the theater most often, where they read the most books, where they do most volunteers work, etc. So my conviction is that if people have the time, they can also, live the good life and actually develop their cultural taste and you name it. But you need the time for it. If you're tired, then the only thing you can do is watch stupid television.
Your third, I guess, the third goal of the Utopia you talk about, and I should just mention, I just have it in my notes here that I did not know that Utopia is both a what is it? A place and both a good and
good place and nowhere. Yeah.
And nowhere. But the third, I guess, leg of this stool is open borders. Why is that important?
Well, this is definitely the most radical idea in my book, right? Especially right now. But again, from an historical perspective, it's interesting to note that borders are a quite recent invention. So they hardly existed at the end of the 19th century. Passports didn't exist either. And the countries that did issue them at some point, like the Ottoman Empire or Russia, they were seen as backwards countries. Borders are a relatively recent invention. And the depressing thing is that actually 3/4 of all walls between nations have been built since the year 2000. So sometimes you get the impression that we live in an era of more immigration than ever, but then you're being misled by the news, because in reality, only 2 to 3% of the world population doesn't live in the country in which they were born, right? So this is absolutely not an era of massive immigration. It's an era of very, very limited immigration in reality.
But what is the value? I mean, aside from the sort of the tradition, and I imagine maybe there's more, in terms of the scope of history, there's more just physical ability for mobility at this point, right? And like, not just we have transportation modes, but we also have a slightly better awareness of where we're supposedly headed to, or what we might see on our way there, right? So it's not like we could fall off the end of the earth, or we're going into, the forbidden zone, or whatever it is. I mean, so the idea of, I mean, to a certain extent, there's less sort of like natural obstacles in some ways to migration than there were, 2, 3, 4, certainly, more than that 100 years ago. So, so aside from tradition, though, what is the value to a society, or even does it make sense to refer to a society if we're going to have open borders? I suspect that it does. But what is the value to specifically to our society for that?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you a couple of things about that. In the first place, we know from a huge amount of evidence from economics that immigration is by far the most powerful tool we have in the fight against global poverty, right? So we can do a lot of things like development aid, cash transfers, and I'm a fan of all of that. But if someone from sub-Saharan Africa has the ability to move with all his or her talents to a country like America, he or she would be able to make so much more money, right? And then all of the standard objections that people have against immigration, like, oh, they're all criminals, or they're terrorists, or they'll take away our jobs, or they'll force wages down, etc. I've taken a look at all those arguments in my book. It turns out that actually the evidence is very limited for that. For example, when we talk about the issue of crime, immigrants in this country, in the United States, are way less likely to end up in jail or to be convicted of a felony. So that's not the case at all. If you look at, are they taking our jobs? Well, actually, there's a lot of evidence that immigrants bring more dynamism to the economy and actually create a lot of jobs. So this is, I think, the most important thing here to keep in mind is that we live in a world of apartheid on just a global scale, basically, right? So 60% of your income is dependent on the simple fact, of which country you were born, yes or no. So I couldn't write a book about a radically better world, or, about utopian crazy ideas that may become reality in the future, and not mention the elephant in the room, right? I had to write something about borders and the nation state.
Fair enough. All right. So, and you make the point at the end of the book that like those folks who gathered at Mount Pelerin in the 40s, They were in the wilderness for about 20 or 30 years, at least, I think, until they were starting to implement their policies. And you don't want to wake up and find that the clock is about to strike 12 and that you haven't, I guess I'm trying to figure out what the metaphor is at that point, gathered your glass slipper and head home or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I mean, but
it's my job as a writer and as an intellectual to come up with these ideas that may be completely out of touch, but that at least help us to ask the right question. So as a historian, the question that always fascinates me the most is how will people in the future look back on us, right? Because it's easy for us to look back on the Middle Ages and say, oh, they were barbarians, right? And they had, slavery or witch hunts and all these kind of terrible things. But then obviously, people in the future, 2 centuries from now, will consider us barbarians in many ways. Now, the question is, what is the most immoral thing we're doing right now? And maybe borders are one of them. Maybe people in the future will look back on this whole system we have of nation states and say, oh my God, that was just, how could they ever justify that?
And so, I mean, if we're looking at this in terms of, and because you start off by saying there's been a tremendous amount of progress, you refer to capitalism as providing has opened the gates to I think you call it the land of plenty, but it can't sustain it as presently configured. Do you have a sense? Do you have a sense? And again, and I don't know as a historian necessarily if this is your portfolio, but that one does not need to subjugate capitalism or does need to subjugate capitalism to advance these agendas that you're talking about?
Well, I think that this whole debate in America about capitalism versus socialism is a bit confusing, right? So I believe in markets. Right? I believe in money. I think they can be useful tools to organize our society, but they need to be used alongside many other things like government intervention or the commons, as we call it, just civilians, organizing their own daily business. The thing is, obviously, that the system that we now call capitalism is not working for probably the majority of people in this country. So, yeah, something definitely needs to change there. But then, Sweden is a capitalist country. Norway is a capitalist country. I grew up in socialist Holland, and I'm still alive. So I think that the first things that need to be done here in America are just common sense, simple things like universal health care for all, public education, universal childcare, all those policies that work really well and are very popular in the countries that try them.
Well, I mean, let me ask you this, because I was caught up a little bit on your terminology in the end when you talk about the underdog socialists, which I think to me seem more descriptive of what we refer to sort of like I guess maybe liberals in this country, I guess to a certain extent. When you say that Holland is socialist, I mean, what is the what tips it across that edge that constitutes socialism in your definition?
Well, you have to imagine that I wrote this book a couple of years ago.
Right.
And since then, a lot of things have changed, right?
That was my next question, but go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Well, I mean, a couple of years ago, it felt to me like that people on the left and progressives only knew what they were against. They were against austerity, against growth, against racism, against homophobia. But there were very few people who had some kind of positive vision of where they actually wanted to go. Now, obviously, we're in a different era now, and I'm more and more hopeful about the future. This whole phenomenon of AOC is just amazing to watch. And just remember here that she's not only influential, and her whole movement is not only influential in America, but also in Europe. I see it changing the conversation in Holland, for example, is that suddenly politicians are willing to come up with bolder proposals to do something about poverty, to do something about inequality, and to do something about climate change. So I'm incredibly excited how the conversation is already shifting. And indeed, now the underdog socialists, you may call them the so-called moderates or the centrists, or like, can't we just tinker a little bit around the edges? And this is all too radical for me. Well, to be honest, I think this is the time to be radical because the challenges we're facing are radical as well.
It has been stunning this progression, and I guess. Well, I mean, I think we might be where we want to land at least, but I'm curious just because obviously you got some acclaim from your call for higher taxes at Davos. And of course and then your subsequent appearance on Tucker Carlson's program. Tucker has since had, I don't know if you're aware of this, a couple of bad weeks since you've been on.
Yeah. Not a great time to be Tucker.
Not a great time to be Tucker. Well, he's had quite a run of it being a pretty good time to be Tucker. But this notion, I just want to get back to circle back around a little bit to the idea of you're calling for higher taxes. This is, I think, largely a function in is it in your function, in your mind, a way to deal with inequality? This story that is just broken about the extremely wealthy families who are willing to pay a huge amount of money just to get their kids into a college that I think that they felt they could say to their friends their kids are in. Is indicative of a dynamic. You make the point, and I don't want to, end our conversation without touching on this because I think this is fascinating, that it is the relative poverty, or one could say the relative wealth, which is one of the primary drivers of discontent in society and can drive people to pay $6 million to get their kid into a university. And I would suggest that if you can afford $6 million to pay for your kid to get into university, you don't need them to get into that kind of university. They're going to be fine.
Absolutely. There's an extraordinary amount of evidence from social science that inequality, if you have too much of it, which is certainly the case right now in the United States, that it becomes a social poison. It basically poisons everything. It poisons relationships between peoples. It poisons, the institutions. People trust their fellow human beings less. They trust their institutions and their democracies less. So that's what's been happening. And my frustration in Davos was that people were talking about inequalities. I was on a panel about the cost of inequality, but no one was talking about taxes, right? So as I said in Davos as well, it felt like being at a firefighters conference, and no one's being allowed to talk about water. Well, if you zoom out a little bit, and if you look at the past 50 years, you'll see that inequality has grown, and taxes have gone down, down, down. I mean, for the very rich. There is a connection here, right? You don't need a PhD in economics to see it. So, I've been arguing for the past couple of years that we should go back to, say, the 50s and the 60s, make America great again, and bring back those higher tax rates.
What was the reception that you got? I mean, I know Davos has its own sort of fractal inequality where like the billionaires get to go get the key card and go all the way up on the elevator, and the 100 millionaires have their lounge areas. But to the extent, I mean, what was the reception that you received? To the extent that you can get a sense of who you've been talking to and who's coming up to you.
Well, as you can imagine, they weren't very happy with me. It was quite an uncomfortable experience. But then again, I'm a believer in the power of ideas. So I do believe that people can be convinced. There were a lot of people, actually, who, when I announced that I was going to Davos, who were very critical of that. I received a lot of emails. People were saying, oh, I'm so disappointed in you. Why do you go there? This is the party of the billionaires. Don't you know that? But I believe in speaking truth to power. That's also why I went on Tucker Carlson, because I think it's important to go there and not only talk to people in your own bubble, but also spread the message elsewhere. And I'm also optimistic that even the billionaires in Davos, you can make them feel uncomfortable, and that in the longer run can actually help them change their mind.
All right. Lastly, let me ask you this, and I understand if you don't want to get anybody in trouble, but the Tucker Carlson thing, okay? Because I've done a lot of these type of hits, and I have a pretty good sense of what the setup is, although I don't know where you actually shot this. But Did you record it after, or was someone recording it in real time, I guess is the question I had behind the scenes there?
It was all in real time. So you have to imagine it was 2 a.m. in Amsterdam at that point. I was in a studio in Amsterdam. And I walked into the studio and asked the producer, like, can you record it? Do you have the equipment, the technology for that? Because I'm going to throw a hand grenade at Tucker Carlson. He's probably not going to like it, and he might not air it. And then this guy said, I can't do that because I don't have the equipment for it. And I said, what, doesn't mind. I'm just going to say what I have to say, and we'll drink a couple of beers after that. And then I did the interview, and then this producer came walking in the room with his iPhone in his hand. So he had recorded it all with his iPhone. So that's how it happened. Then we started drinking beer for the next 2 hours. It was 4 a.m. at that point, I think. And then I went back into the cab, and it was only in the cab that I looked at the video again and thought, holy shit, this is something I have here. So yeah, it wasn't really planned.
And I guess you had a sense as you went out for beers that they would not probably be airing that segment on Tucker's show.
Well, to be honest, I still thought that he was going to air it. I don't know. Maybe I'm naive. But maybe it's also my Dutch background. We Dutch, we don't have issues with people swearing at stuff. We don't bleep anything. But you Americans are so sensitive about everything. Oh, he said bullshit. Well, who cares?
All right, we're just going to have to drop out that bullshit term. We'll fix that in post. That's really no. I'm joking. That's great. We really enjoyed it and appreciate the work you're doing. And folks should check out Utopia for Realists. We will put a link on majority.fm. How we can build the ideal world. It's a great read. And Rutger Bregman, really appreciate your time today.
Really, thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, folks. That's great. I love that story.
It's a nice little image.
Yes, it is.
2 Dutch guys getting drunk after trolling Tucker Carlson from across the Atlantic.
I wish I was there. I read a book in college called Dealing with the Dutch, which it reminded me of that. That was awesome.
I also just appreciate, it's 2 a.m. I just did my cable television hit. Let's go have a beer for a couple hours.
Obviously beers.
Obviously.
Dealing with the Dutch, man.
All right, we're going to take a break, head into
You're so sensitive. We say bullshit. Who cares? Think about the Dutch IMer from Philly.
I don't know what that means.
There was, the IMer who requested less profanity on the shows.
I don't remember that. I guess that really stuck in your craw.
Deeply.
When was that?
Actually, it was only a couple days ago. You're really not getting enough sleep.
Michael felt attacked. He was talking about it all yesterday.
Oh, is that right?
All day. I dedicated the show. TMBS last night was in defense of swearing.
There was 80 F words.
Yeah. What's there?
You know what? I don't care.
That's how you'll lose your YouTube monetization. Watch that. You snap into.
Gosh darn it!
For some reason, the show last night did get it's like a halfway suitable for advertisers type of thing. I'm not sure why.
Probably all
Joshua and John Idarola, so it shouldn't be. But
it's the swearing.
Weird.
It's the swearing. Anyways, folks, Calm and Comfort by Sharper Image is the luxurious weighted blanket that's designed with high density comfort fill to promote a sense of calmness for a restful night's sleep. The Calm and Comfort weighted blanket comes with a 90-day anxiety-free best nights of sleep of your life guarantee from Sharper Image. And right now, our listeners can go to calmingcomfortblanket.com, use the promo code majority at checkout, receive $15 off the displayed price. Again, that's calmingcomfortblanket.com, promo code majority, because you cannot put a price on a great night's sleep. Folks, this just in. Paul Manafort got 3.5 years sentence in his case in this was the second case that he was facing, or I should say the second set of charges in We know the other day he got 4.5 years. This was the second set of charges that were brought against him in a federal district court in Washington. This judge was far less inclined to see all the good deeds that Paul Manafort had apparently done in his life.
Honorably toiled for dictators for decades.
Exactly.
That's what he said. That's what I said. That's obviously what our position is.
So he got about half of what the maximum would have been. The maximum, my understanding, would have been 10 years for the two different counts, 5 each. He ended up getting 3.5 years. That actually is a secondary story, because the moment it appears that the moment that Paul Manafort was sentenced, Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance unsealed 15 fraud and conspiracy charges against Paul Manafort. So understand, these are state charges brought by the New York City District Attorney. Why is this important? Because you cannot be pardoned by the President of the United States for state charges. So if Paul Manafort had in his mind this whole time, I'm going to get pardoned, there does not appear to be any charges against me in, remember, Southern District of New York. And this is also true with the Cohen thing, and I have a feeling they probably have charges. Cy Vance probably has a whole set of charges against Cohen too. Southern District, when you hear SDNY, the Southern District of New York, understand that is a federal office. That is the federal, essentially local affiliate of the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Department of Justice. The New York DA, as opposed, and it could have also been the state attorney general, although we had a little problem with our last one. The New York DA has a whole new set of charges that will not in any way allow for Manafort to escape the situation with a pardon, assuming he's convicted of one of these 15 fraud and conspiracy charges against Paul Manafort. And I got to say, I'm not a lawyer. I'm also not a professional gambler, but I would bet that at least one or two of those are going to stick out of that 15.
There's a certain probability of that, I would say.
So things are going to get a little now. The real point, it seems to me, this is obviously somewhat coordinated, right? I mean, in some fashion. How, we don't know, and I don't know what would have been considered appropriate in this context. This suggests that that Mueller or the U.S. Attorney's Office feel that Manafort has more to give. Because a pardon at this point, after he's been convicted, Donald Trump may go and pardon him, but Manafort was, he's going to go to jail. Wasn't going to help further any type of investigation into Trump. They either feel that Manafort has more to give, or that this is a message to other people associated with Trump that, like, look, we know how this is going to work. And if you were thinking you were going to wait for a pardon, you may want to think twice. So it's one of those things. It could be both of those things. They're not mutually exclusive at all. So,
you know what I respect about David Axelrod? He's not a rat. Because what you have is these RICO cases, and in a sense, it's really unfair. Because what they do is they flip somebody and then they become a rat. Testify against the whole organization.
Chicago politics. All right. Well,
it's totally unfair.
We're going to take a quick break.
But I do respect that David's kept his mouth shut. I respect that greatly in a certain sense.
We're going to take a quick break. We will talk more about this in the fun half. Just a reminder, your support makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajority.report.com. Jointhemajority.report.com. Just pennies a day. Support the free show. Get the extra content every day. jointhemajority.report.com. Today is Wednesday. Like I said at the beginning of the show, that means that last night was Tuesday. That means that things were a little bit messy when we came in this.
Oh, were they?
No, not really. But I just needed a hook. Go ahead.
It was a great show last night. Commentary on 2020, the return of pseudo-woke politics. Joshua Kahn of the Wildfire Project, a professional organizer, gave us like a tutorial on how to run and organize campaigns. In the postgame, we continued the lesson using The Simpsons. And then John Inarola talked about how terrible Joe Biden is. Patreon.com/TMBS or subscribe on our Michael Brooks Show YouTube channel.
Jamie, the Antifada.
Yeah, so this week on the Antifada, Andy was finally back from his trip to Mexico. I was back from a much shorter trip to Mexico. And Andy actually did a number of interviews with people from the migrant caravan who were currently working at an anarchist mutual aid center in Tijuana. He got their stories in their own words, which I think is super important because a lot of the time we talk about the people in the caravan in sort of a monolithic way, like they're these like faceless suffering victims. Like, no, they are individuals with their own stories and their own agency and their own politics. And I thought that was really meaningful. He also talked to some people at a nonprofit organization called El Otro Lado that helps people with the process of applying for asylum. And yeah, I'm really stoked about this one, and I'm glad that we got to do it. So check it out, patreon.com/the Antifada, as well as podcast apps.
This weekend on Literary Hangover, we're doing Mary Rowlandson, Captivity Narratives, and King Philip's War. The following episode is going to be on The Soul of Man Under Socialism by Oscar Wilde with David Griscom of the TMBS, actually.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So that will be relevant to the conversation with Rutger, actually. A lot of automation and shorter work weeks and that sort of stuff in there. Is that board dead?
Yeah, it is.
We didn't use it last night.
We turned it around or
sorry.
unplugged it.
Oh, it got unplugged?
Yeah.
The turnaround?
It did.
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess that was your mess. Ha ha!
See you in the fun half. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous, you're a little bit upset, you're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457-238 56 27 1/2 5 8s 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good.
Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up. Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey! Shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
we are back. I'm still reading up on the new charges. But I can tell you that the presiding judge over the Manafort case made a point. She seemed to be very aware of what happened after Judge Ellis sentenced Manafort to 47 months. And that is that you can expect Donald Trump to come out and say that the judge said there was no collusion. And so she specifically said, we are not ruling on collusion one way or another. The Mueller investigation continues. Conspired or collusion with the Russian government was not presented in this case, she said. So it's not appropriate to say investigators haven't found anything when you lied to the investigators. That would be his obstruction charges. But she's basically speaking to the president. And then meanwhile, these charges drop in New York City, and that's going to be fascinating to see. I remember when I gave him $25,000, Cy Vance, and that doesn't go where it used to go. Again, in those hours in the morning where I hear the pipes banging and I've woken up and I lie in bed and I'm like, just got to wait this out. And they bang for like 25 minutes because the heat comes on. And I'm like, don't let your mind wander. Don't let your mind wander. Don't let your mind wander. I know tonight what I'm going to be thinking is, why didn't Cyrus Vance, how was it that he or any other New York district attorney couldn't find charges against Donald Trump for over decades? How is that possible? How can that possibly be?
It's because I'm smart.
I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that's what Donald Trump thinks. But there's absolutely no evidence. I mean, ProPublica finds it. All due respect, I'm sure they're great investigative reporters. They don't have like subpoena power. They don't have the same leverage that a lot of law enforcement. I mean, and now it seems like whatever was inhibiting them before, one of two things, right? Whatever was inhibiting these officials from finding stuff and digging around and finding stuff is gone, or they just they didn't even occur to them that Donald Trump was anything but an upstanding citizen.
He was on TV.
Was known as a very respected but also low-key businessman.
Customer's always right.
That's what I say to people when I don't pay them.
Exactly. Let's just start with this. Do we have more audio from Tucker too?
Oh yeah, I have a bunch of Tucker stuff.
Okay, well let's out of respect for our last guest, Rutger Bregman, let's play a little bit more Tucker, shall we? Now, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, Tucker Carlson has been having some issues lately with appearances that he made almost 10 years ago on a radio show. Now, where he's talked in the past about having, issues like this so-called rapist is going to take care of somebody for the rest of their life. I mean, can you really charge him with rape? So he has a slight misunderstanding of Now, to be fair, this was 10 years ago. Of course, nobody would be talking about Iraq on radio anymore because nobody cares anymore. We've killed all these people. But here is Tucker Carlson talking about his sense of the Iraqis. And these are clips that range from 2006 to 2008 or so. Let's listen to. So this isn't a one-off. Maybe we're misinterpreting what he's saying. Let's listen and you decide.
Iraq is a crappy place filled with a bunch. Iraq is a crappy place filled with a bunch of, semi-literate primitive monkeys. But I just have zero.
Pause it for 1 second. Iraq is a crappy place filled with semi-literate monkeys. Now, I don't imagine there's a lot of people out there who need me to justify the statement that is incorrect and racist.
It's not meant to be taken literal. There's not literal semi-literate monkeys.
Oh, he's just referring to the people there as semi-literate. Yes. So he's not saying that's a country full of really smart monkeys.
What he means is that because they are, we shouldn't go to war with them. So I don't agree, but maybe we could build a fucking alliance to end war.
But I just have zero sympathy for them or their culture, a culture where people just don't use toilet paper or forks.
Pause it for 1 second. I can tell you that in addition to using toilet paper and forks in Iraq, by 2006, it was quite clear there was no threat to this country whatsoever. There was our Defense Department, I believe by 2006, was releasing Defense Department numbers that we were responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 civilians. I imagine that number is significantly higher now on Defense Department numbers, which certainly were at the low end of assessments of how many hundreds of thousands of people civilians were killed. Never mind, I know by 2006, we were talking about 2 million displaced refugees, 2 million internally displaced, 2 million that were sent out of the country. But he has no sympathy for these people. He cheerleaded this war, too. I can tell you that right now. The American public, certainly by May 30th of 2006, was aware of all these things. That's why they, in part, got rid of the Republicans.
And the way they treat women, I agree with you. Their culture is, but you're in their homeland, and you're over there as an American.
Pause it. I will also say the way they treated women in Saddam Hussein's Iraq was probably one of the most progressive things about that regime.
Yeah, I'm sure he cares a lot about the way they treat women.
Indeed.
And if they didn't have toilet paper in the Saddam era, but this because of our sanctions.
The co-host is saying this. Here's Tucker's response.
American who they hate, and they want nothing more than the Americans off of their soil, so they're not going to play games.
They can just shut the fuck up and obey, is my view.
How could you salvage Iraq at this point?
I don't, it's beyond our control. I mean, if somehow the Iraqis decided to behave like human beings or something, he'd need to say, look, I'm a bigot, okay? I'm a bigot. I don't like Islamic extremists. Like, if you are really heavily into Islam, I'm sorry, I don't care for you that much. And I don't care what that sounds like. You can call me a racist. You can come whatever the fuck you want.
And at this juncture, you could say that and not catch a lot of shit for it.
You certainly could. I'd vote for you if you said that. White men have, they've contributed some, I would say, like creating civilization and stuff. I think they've done a pretty, I don't know, whatever.
Right. White men created civilization. Thank you. Thank you, white guys.
Just a note on the semi-literate monkeys comment. Iraq was actually more literate than many U.S. states prior to the invasion.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, but it was to oppose war.
So there's Tucker Carlson. Now, I suppose you could say, you could cherry pick a couple of isolated statements over the course of 2 years. That's not indicative of the man. These are incidentally statements that were made on public radio. Commercial, I think it's
not actually, in fact, public radio. Bubba the Love Sponge wasn't after Morning Edition.
Publicly broadcasted radio.
Really
let me just say that.
Bubba the Love Sponge should go on NPR.
Tucker Carlson's a scumbag. If Fox wants to maintain Tucker Carlson on their payroll, they can do so. But the folks who own Fox should be completely ostracized from society for allowing someone like that on their broadcast. I mean, that's just the bottom line.
Well, they should be already for everything that they've done, right? They're
Indeed.
basically a disinformation outlet at this point in time.
And the information, it's not even just that they're a disinformation outlet, it is that they are a disgusting disinformation outlet.
I think it's worth doing a little memory lane trip at some point, though, to recognize that obviously the vulgarity stands out, but I remember that time. Like, now this is the time where I was very well aware of what people were saying. And you had Democrats like Dick Durbin couching their criticisms of ongoing operations in Iraq as literally, we've done enough for those people. They need to clean up their own mess after we had invaded and killed hundreds of thousands of them. So obviously it stands out because of just how disgusting it is. But in that context of that time, there was just a uniformity.
Well, that's the only way you can get out of. That's the only way you can get out of a war, right? If you've gone in there like we did and invaded a country, it has to be ultimately, well, we've got to leave because it's their fault. They're not. Right. They don't show enough gratitude for the fact that we came in.
They don't show enough
and
gratitude.
bombed them back into another age.
There was a super bizarre time where the only people, and it was a total lie and fake, obviously, but the only people who spoke with any even feigned public respect about Iraqis on mainstream media were Bush administration officials who were like, "We gotta give them democracy; they deserve it."
Now, if you are Tucker Carlson and you are in desperate need of someone to come in and come on your show and justify your non-apology. You want someone who is a heavy hitter, someone who's going to have some type of gravitas, some type of moral and intellectual authority, so that you can bring on a guest who is going to defend you. You're not going to have to do it yourself. This is the type of guest you need on your show. Someone with gravitas. Someone who can be out in front of you so that you don't look like you're trying to be self-serving. Unfortunately for Tucker, none of those people would come on, so he got Dave Rubin.
Dave Rubin hosts the Rubin Report. We don't agree on everything politically, but he is a sincere believer in free speech, so we wanted to talk to him tonight. Dave, thanks very much for coming on.
I am quite curious as to what they disagree with.
Actually, you know what? Tucker might have, for purposes of branding, better and more progressive tax policies.
That's absolutely true. Now, Tucker might be really against. I don't know. Is he? I think he's against choice.
He might have some issues with gay people.
He might. I don't think he would articulate that, Tucker Carlson. He might have it with abortion, but of course, Dave is really, really, really reluctantly pro-choice. So reluctantly pro-choice, he's probably going to change soon because of how liberals want to kill born babies and call it abortion. But let's leave that aside. But kudos for Tucker for having to. I mean, this is how desperate Tucker is. I'm so desperate that A, I'm going to book Dave Rubin to defend me, and B, I'm going to play along with Dave Rubin's branding up top because I'm that desperate that I'm afraid Dave Rubin won't come back on.
Coming on. I'm starting to think that a lot of us overestimated the willingness of the Democratic establishment to coexist with people who disagree with them and underestimated the real threat, the actual existential threat to speech that we face now. Do you think that's right?
Well, I wish I could say that this whole situation is shocking, but this is exactly what I've been raising the alarm about on my show for the last 5 or so years. As you know, I come from the left. I was a progressive. I still consider myself a liberal in the best sense of liberalism.
Pause it for 1 second. Pause it for 1 second. Let's see. I wish that we could go back in time and see what Dave Rubin would say about Iraqis.
The Rubin
if they were
dossier.
Semi-literate monkeys, could we please open up the research vault? Thank you.
It's a time machine.
Oh, we're going back? Oh, that's it. That's pretty good. Oh. Well, fortunately, we don't need a time machine because everything on the internet lives forever, ladies and gentlemen. So we have found some old, rediscovered Dave Rubin blog posts, and
this isn't his joke notebook, just to clarify.
This is not his joke notebook.
This is my idea notebook.
And it is stunning how liberal Dave was back then. You will know that it's Dave Rubin because it is not an intellectually rigorous racism that we're looking at. It is super sloppy. Here are some of his anti-Arab jokey jokes in his blog. Israel is pulling out of Gaza today. Why is it that Jews can't live in a place that is run by Arabs, but Arabs can live in Israel, France, Britain, America, and every other country on the planet? Oh, yeah, the Arabs are backwards, fundamentalist wackos. I keep forgetting that.
You would have to... a lot of stand-up doesn't translate well into writing. You got to feel the animal energy in the room.
There is nothing more dangerous than fundamentalist Arabism.
Fundamentalist Arabisms cause a lot of problems. He's so stupid.
So stupid.
You know, we criticize Dave a lot for his complete cravenness and inconsistency, but he's absolutely maintaining being below room temperature moron.
Stupid.
Here is when Dave Rubin has that moment where he's asking God questions, right? The Arabs, those peace-loving, freedom-loving people, are saying they'll kill Jews wherever they are. I thought that the Jews were the chosen people. Chosen for what exactly?
Oh, my God.
This is almost as good as Meghan McCain's sick day.
Yep. That was, that was in 05 and 04, and now 06. In American news...
I love this.
What was he talking about? China?
This is
He
him.
was doing a lot of in-depth international stuff.
This is him trying out for Weekend Update.
Right.
All right.
Oh, totally. But I love. This is like the tenor of these jokes really are for and the peanuts bags are so small on the airplane. It's like the Holocaust. What's the deal with that, huh?
In American news, it looks like we're going to sell some major ports to a company run by the United Arab Emirates. I remember this. Everyone's making a big deal about it, as if giving control to our ports to an Arab country is a problem. But frankly, I think Arabs have earned our respect and trust.
Wait for it.
Where's he going with this?
I'm going to have to retract that sentence. It's a misdirect. It's a misdirect. Just calm down.
Sorry.
You don't know where he's going with it.
You know what? You're totally right. Hold your
It's
fire.
a master craftsman.
Hold your fire. This is a comedian at work.
I turned on CNN while writing that. And some Arabs just burned down a Chuck E. Cheese's in Pakistan.
They're not Arabs. I'm sorry.
Well, no.
Sorry to be that guy. But
Yeah.
They're not Arab. Okay.
Yeah. How do you know that some Arabs didn't fly to Pakistan?
What we did was we were flying from the Emirates to ink the port deal, and we did a layover in Karachi to burn down a fucking Chuck E. Cheese.
Hell will freeze over before I have people like that in charge of my ports.
Ooh. To paraphrase the great liberal philosopher John Stuart Mill, hell will freeze over before I have those people control my ports.
Is in charge of my ports a double entendre? Like, what is he? Or does he actually own ports? Or
back then I was a socialist.
Theoretically, if I had a port, I wouldn't let an Arab run it.
Back then I was a socialist, and I thought that we all owned the ports. That's how deluded I was. But then I left the Young Turks.
Is it though that there's some metaphorical special quality to Chuck E. Cheese's? Like, I can't quite make out what part of it is. If you don't have respect for Chuck E. Cheese, you can't touch my metaphorical port.
Exactly.
Well, some people just don't get some jokes, Sam.
I didn't realize
that's what I'm asking.
What Sam Harris explained to me that I was actually doing thought experiments. I was ahead of the curve.
Well,
you know what's amazing if I could just give some advice. if he just stopped with like that would be a lot funnier. Like why, like then it would be like an old Borscht Belt style. Like why? Because what have the Arabs ever done?
It's got to be like it's got to be something like I think the Arabs have earned our respect and trust. Wait, what?
Right.
Dot, dot, dot. And that's
right.
the way
And then that would be the joke. But
It's
instead he
literally-
actually was like, how am I going to land this? How am I going to land this? Ooh, a Chuck E. Cheese.
Okay,
That
let's.
brings it home.
Borat's
Are we
not
s-
jokes.
Are we still doing Dave? Okay,
We
let it
can.
roll. Let's
Yeah,
see.
your wife's
Where else did he
dress
go with
looks
this?
good.
I'm really
Matt.
starting to understand why he chose this career path, because the bar is, it's at the appropriate height for somebody of his talents.
Indeed, and he's
ableist.
he brushes up against it. It's still a challenge, but he's.
I still consider myself a liberal in the best sense of liberalism, classical liberalism, and I believe in the individual and all of that stuff that we've talked about several times. But I want to address a couple things here. First, on the way that you've responded to the attacks by not apologizing. I think that was exactly the right thing to do. All of us have joked. All of us have made mistakes. All of us have a past. Yeah. All of us have done things that we're not proud of, and a series of other things. If you've lived, you've
Pause
done
it.
those things.
Wait a second. Tucker Carlson was not joking. He has a past. Rubin is saying it we're not proud of. Well, that's what you do if you have something that you feel badly about, that you're not proud of, this is what you do when you're called about it and you have to discuss it. I'm sorry.
You're just going to say, turn this into a nice contrition segment and we move forward? What's going on?
I regret that I said those things. That's what the point is. But yet he's saying, the way you handled it by not apologizing for that thing that was in your past that you may regret.
That we both are, I guess, going to agree is a mistake.
That you are not saying you regret. So
I'm totally
good for you.
on board with you not apologizing for
In other
things that
words,
were clearly mistakes.
You're so desperate
sorry.
to have me on, and I'm so desperate that I can only get on your show. So both of our disingenuousness is going to meet in the middle and just do a beautiful dance.
I heard that 4 people turned you down, and I actually almost got into a traffic accident speeding over the studio when I was booked at the last minute.
I knew that investing in that lawn chair and waiting out in front would be worth it, and here I am.
I love how that everything he just said there is actually like totally fine and correct, leading to exactly the opposite of the whole premise.
Exactly.
It's like, that's right.
It's something you
everybody
regret.
makes mistakes, and therefore they should apologize and move forward. Right, I agree.
Everybody
Tucker
makes
just had like a
mistakes.
whole like, I'm not going to back down.
Everybody makes mistakes, and I recognize they shouldn't have did certain things. So, like, it should be the right of them to not ever face any sort of accountability about
Which is
it.
exactly why you built your whole segment on not taking any responsibility for anything you just said. I agree.
I mean, did Tucker even admit that he made a mistake? Because
that's the
whole point.
Right, because it seems like the things that he said are completely congruous with the things that he says now.
Right.
They're just more vulgar.
Exactly.
So, like, I don't know if anyone out there thinks that, like, oh, this now impugns on the good name of Fox News, hence he should be fired. I think the Fox News viewers are eating it up.
Oh, yeah.
And, like, he doesn't have to apologize, so why would he?
Dave Rubin is too stupid at any speed.
Now, look. Tucker was in trouble. He went to Dave Rubin because nobody else would come on his show to defend him. However, if you're Tucker Carlson, you strike out and you end up with Dave Rubin, who contradicts really everything that the whole point of the segment by saying that it's something you regret.
You know that
Tucker,
Tom
and
Petty
you
song,
should-
Won't Back Down? That's all about when you make a mistake, and everybody makes mistakes, but then you won't back down.
And you call
But
Peck-
Tucker has a safety valve. And what is that safety valve? If you can't get a guest to come on your show, then you go to a coworker to pretend like everything is just hunky-dory.
Live tonight in the 9 p.m. hour, Sean Hannity.
All right, I got to give you a compliment. So Tucker was going to be off this week. No, Tucker, he was going to be off this week. Becomes a busy news week, and he's not going to take the mob's crap. And he came into work, to stand up to this, and I want the great viewers of this channel to know that.
Well, I thank you, Sean, and you've helped me every bit of the way. I have
God,
to say.
hold
We've
on,
been
pause it
talking-
for 1 second.
Totally
So he said,
unprompted.
if I understand what Sean was saying is that you had your vacation scheduled, but it was a busy news week, so you came in, busy news week, but you came in and to say, take this, mob. I'm not going to stay on my vacation, and I'm going to stay on the channel because of the busy news week. And then Tucker was like, oh, this is totally impromptu. Why, thank you, Sean.
Well, I thank you, Sean, and you've helped me every bit of the way. I have to say, we've been talking every day.
Yeah,
and
I'm an
sick of it.
expert
I'm
at this. They've been
absolutely
trying to
sick of it.
kill me for 23
Yeah,
years.
you
I kind of get it. I'm like trying to help. I'm like, you.
Pause it. You know, I have been saying really racist stuff and inappropriate stuff for years and years, and they've been trying to get me off. But fortunately, I was safely behind Rush on radio, and but good.
I'm like trying to help. I'm like, you, Laura, you, me, Laura, you. It's like never stops. But anyway, always great to see you and have a
Thanks,
great
Sean.
rest
Great
of
to see you.
vacation that you were supposed to have. All right.
Right. Have that vacation now because there's no news now. There's no news now.
Glad you still
Totally
do that.
impromptu.
And of course, before he went off onto vacation, Tucker Carlson had to get, was a little bit upset. Again, he couldn't get anybody on to defend him. So he went on the attack against the media reporters.
Others who are trying to hurt you. That's the message from Fox. I think all of this matters because it's about decency and standards. It's about the corrosive, ugly, nasty behavior that sometimes happens on cable news or off cable news involving some of these hosts.
It's about decency, cries the eunuch. We must have decency. By which the eunuch means less disobeying, more obedience. Stop criticizing the program, or else. This is the face of state media. Why does Fox even exist, they wonder? We've got 11 other perfectly good cases.
Calls him a eunuch?
See, I don't know. This is where the liberal media kind of fails in their response because, he's going after his vulgarity, it seems, but, would he be okay with Tucker Carlson and Fox News existing if they were saying the same things without such vulgar language? That's kind of the implication.
Right, as opposed to, well, that's the thing, is that, yes, and that is why, there is no doubt that these entities, and people forget, a dozen years ago, when Fox was just as odious, if not more so, you had other press outlets defending them as real journalists. And I got news for you, folks. They weren't any more real journalists 10 years ago than they are today. And Bill O'Reilly, in his fake awards that he won, and just going back through the years, the War on Christmas, which was 90% of their programming at that time, they were no more real news than they are today. Maybe less so. But other journalist outlets protected them. And so the bar is extremely high for other cable television news to recognize just how horrible they are. So they have to go to it's the lack of decorum, not so much the constant stream of lies that is pumped out. I mean, that's the sad thing about that, but I don't know if he's a eunuch. This is also pretty funny. The Jacob Wall, you'll recall, this is the young man who had the bombshell that Robert Mueller had sexually assaulted somebody, and he got as far as calling a press conference on behalf of the woman who was going to announce that she had been a victim of these. And he went to the press conference and she never showed up. And he just said, and it's not there. And he's been asked about that ever since. And he says, well, I'm not talking about that anymore.
Win some, lose some.
And so this is pretty upsetting. Jacob Wall received death threats
Just because this guy is a joke doesn't mean that he should face this kind of activity.
Right. It is wrong to receive death threats. Wall and fellow, I don't know exactly how to characterize her, Laura Loomer, the woman who chained herself to Twitter because, to literally the building that housed Twitter because Twitter suspended her from the service, went to Minneapolis last month to investigate whether their quest to prove Representative Ilhan Omar married her own brother was true. And his videos, apparently Wall's videos to his fans, were premised on the idea that what he was embarking upon, going to Minneapolis, as you know, was incredibly dangerous because there are all sorts of ne'er-do-wells in Minneapolis.
No-go zones.
Yeah, no-go zones who wanted to take him out. Apparently, he often would wear a bulletproof vest because of the danger in Minneapolis.
They call it Target Center for a reason.
He received this is really, he received some death threats, one of which was, I hope you effing know, and the death threater didn't say effing, I can assure you. Know that if I bump into you in Dinkytown or anywhere else in my city, I'm going to shoot you.
It's a sort of polite threat.
And
if I happen to bump into you when you're visiting, I'll kill you.
on your effing bodies. Ooh. Some Twitter account told him.
God, the left.
Get that F out of my city, you piece of S, now.
That's more like it.
This is from a Twitter handle called Drake Holmes 612. Well,
gotta unfollow him.
Where Jacob very smartly went to go report Mr. Drake Holmes 612 to the police, and here is a video he shot of himself doing so.
Hi there. We're journalists on town for business for a report we're doing, and we received a couple of death threats.
Yeah, we watched it progress over 24 hours to what you're seeing now, and that's a steady stream coming in every couple hours.
Now, apparently, this Drake Holmes 612. Here's the police report. Victim 1, Wall, Jacob Alexandra. Threat. Terroristic threats completed. Homeland Security offense completed. And apparently, and the other victim was Ali Abdul Razak Akbar.
That's who he's doing the documentary with.
Doing the documentary with. Now, this Drake Holmes, I guess, is a diversity. What is it? Let's see. What does he say on his? He's a Drake Holmes is a diversity coordinator, born and raised in Minneapolis. The problem is Drake Holmes is also a really, really bad speller. And he misspelled his own last name and his username, which is weird. And it turns out that Drake Holmes is a creation of one of Jacob Wall's fake accounts.
It doesn't mean that diversity coordinators aren't tremendously dangerous people. I think we can all be intellectually honest about that.
I was going to say, if a diversity coordinator were that hard in the DMs, for real, I might be kind of impressed.
Yeah, there you go. And apparently Wall deleted the account because somebody got wind of it. So Jacob Wall, my understanding is, wasn't there some controversy recently about somebody who created their own fake death threats or attack or something?
Jussie Smollett.
Jussie Smollett.
I also want to point out that he says hater of racist homophones and bigots.
Oops.
In his Twitter bio.
Yes,
I don't like homophones.
He doesn't like words that sound like other words.
Well, Drake Holmes
could
just be a really bad speller. That could have been the character that Jacob Wall was.
I think the character objects to the Euro standards of spelling.
He really hates if you say, I threw the baseball through the tunnel.
So Jacob Wall may end up serving a little bit of time in Minneapolis, which is It's pretty hard. Pretty hard.
To be honest, it's weird that he didn't serve any time for the whole Mueller stunt.
It'd be funny if Ilhan Omar, like, actually, she's just like in one of her like walks down the hallway and she's being harassed by some idiot from Fox or something. She's also like, and also Jacob Walsh should watch himself in the prisons. He just starts validating. Like, if I was him, I'd be very mindful in the corridors of the prison.
Unbelievable.
Maybe take your lunch in the cell.
Like, I would eat privately and hashtag no new friends.
So, all right, I want to touch on this this scandal. That I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it. I mean, I don't want to sound jaded, but there were 50 indictments the FBI presented that involved. I mean, it's a fascinating story, and it is indicative of a real ill in our society that we talked about a little bit with Rutger Bregman about what inequality does in terms of like driving everyone insane and creating massive discontent across the board. You had 40 some odd parents who apparently have been indicted for paying what appears to be some type of network of people who would go out and, according to the perpetrator, find a guaranteed side door into the admissions process of colleges. You don't get the back door, which is, I'm going to donate a library or something to that effect, but a guaranteed admission, which is basically, we're going to do stuff like pay off the crew coach to say that he wants to recruit these people for crew, and then they'll never be on the crew team. Or we're going to Photoshop pictures of my child playing water polo as part of a cover story as to why they should get in. We're going to bribe people. The media is making this about Hollywood because apparently there are two actresses involved too. There was also a top hedge funder, this guy Bill McGlashan, who was an investor at the private equity firm TPG. He's among these other 49 people accused of participating in a bribery ring involving parents, admissions counselors, and athletic coaches at Yale, Wake Forest, and the University of Southern California.
You needed to bribe to get your kids into the University of Southern California.
Not to sound like a snobby,
I'm going to be a total
snob here, but like, is it really that hard to get into USC given all the advantages that you people have had in life?
You want a guarantee. You want a guarantee.
Look, if you came from a poor family and you got into USC, huge accomplishment. But if you come from a family like this and you need to pull some type of hustle to get into USC, get the rock
Well, it's
outta
ridiculous
here.
because I read one of the parents was like, we don't want them to get into Arizona State. And it's like, just go to Arizona State.
How about just don't go to school? You're fine. You could literally do nothing. Just drive. You're going to inherit money. It's like until Bernie's president.
He apparently signed off on plans to doctor a photo that would make McGlashan's son look like a football recruit. And apparently they had people take fake tests for them. They had a whole system where they would set up where, like, if you had to take the SATs or something, you'd need a special, like, oh, he's got a doctor's appointment or he's got some problem. So they would do like a separate one. They'd have proctors of the
I just
test.
saw in one of the emails, one of the actresses, I forget which one, she wrote to the person that they were coordinating this with, like, Rutro, the high school wants to use their own proctor.
Like, why do you want to go to college in the first place? Like, what do you think you're going to do when you get there? You're going to pay someone to write all your papers for you?
Sure. They're going to pay.
Well, that's actually a really good point because a lot of these kids buy their way into Ivy League schools, and guess what? They graduate just fine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, it makes me so
but
mad.
here's the thing. There was a quote from the
I mean, Kushner did this all legally because his dad was seriously loaded.
here's the point. There was a quote.
Working, and it's very exciting.
There's a quote from the U.S. attorney who I think was part of the announcement of these indictments. And he said, we're not talking about donating a building. We're talking about fraud. Now, here's the problem, right? Like, this is why I think this story is revealing in some respects, but it's also akin to saying we're going to focus on Bernie Madoff instead of all of the things that nearly brought down the entire economy and lost millions of people their jobs and millions of people their homes under the mortgage crisis. I mean, there is a problem with higher education being so out of reach for people without going seriously into debt, with essentially some type of filter that ranges from that tuition through donating a building. And donating a building and getting your kid in is legal, but it seems to be even far more corrosive than even what we've seen here. I mean, people are talking about, like, I feel bad for the kids because they've been taught to steal and lie, as opposed to you could buy a building and get in.
Yeah.
That merit is a function of how wealthy your parents are, that your merit is a function, statistically speaking, of the zip code that you've been born in. And the idea that this is not a bad value to be teaching kids, or that to be unleashing in society, or to have a U.S. attorney say, like, we're talking about something bad here, not like donating a building and getting your kid in.
No,
this is a problem.
Like, oh, it's not the problem that rich people can buy their kids' way into school. It's that they did it in this one very illegal way. Possibly because, when multiple generations of rich people buy their way into school and pay people to do their work for them, eventually they're not even smart enough to pull off the scam. So it's reached a decadent period.
No, those are the people that don't have the same level of money to just buy a building or the connections. That's why they have to do it in this new money, hustle, tacky sort of way versus just the oh no, we'll just donate a building.
$6 million can get you at least like an auditorium or something.
Also, certain parents did this in a way that was tax deductible too.
Right.
Oh,
I think there's a lot of ways to, but I just also think I mean, when they do those silly, sanctimonious, it teaches young people, to cheat, and it's every single thing in this culture teaches you to do that.
In the Constitution,
you would be a sucker to not do that.
Indeed.
And if you're going to change policy to disincentivize it, of course, but it's so the people who aren't hustling are the suckers, and that's the system they've created.
And you know what the real problem with this is, of course, is that it besmirches successful people in America.
Yeah, I was wondering.
No.
Scandal, millions of dollars paid to bribe to college coaches, school officials, administrators. Actor Felicity Huffman was released on $250,000 bond. Actor Lori Loughlin's husband will be released on a $1 million bond. Liz Peek with us now. I said before, I'm tired of moral lectures from the elites, and this makes things worse.
Harvey Weinstein and now college admissions, right?
Hollywood,
it is.
I
kind of
Pause
agree.
it for a second. Wait, what? This is a moral lecture from the elites that you shouldn't be tissing the millionaires who buy their way into colleges. And then she says, yeah, this is a problem with Hollywood, just like Weinstein. I mean, they've got to get better writers or something over there.
I kind of agree. Unfortunately, this is not just Hollywood. It's wealthy people all across America. And I think what's so offensive about this
it's
is...
unfortunate it's not just Hollywood, because then we could write it off as a liberal thing. This is going to actually require just a little bit of imagination on our part. Go back to
It's wealthy people all across America. And I think what's so offensive about this is, first of all, one of the tragedies is the kids. The kids are being basically taught from their parents that this is the way to get ahead in life, to cheat and steal. Secondly, already we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez out there saying, just another example about how the wealthy and powerful in our country are not playing on the same field as everybody else. She already has. And this is going to become another cudgel with basically beating up successful Americans. I think, though, the real tragedy here is that the kids involved in this, who apparently did not know what was going on, are shamed. They're probably going to lose their spots in school. And obviously, we don't have to feel too sorry for them because they're all rich and famous. But this is a horrible thing that these parents have done to the system and to the kids.
Oh, you're so right, Liz. You really are.
Yeah, you're so right. So let's just to review. There are two tragedies here. One is that the kids of these 39 adults, are embarrassed, and they're going to have to live with this. Although a couple of them knew about it, but the ones who didn't, which is tragic. But that's the main tragedy. The other tragedy, of course, is the kids who don't get in, and that it indicates there's a deep rot in our in this so-called meritocracy. Oh wait, no, I'm sorry, that's not the second tragedy. The tragedy is that someone's pointing out that there's a deep rot in our
that AOC has a talking point.
That AOC has a talking point. That there is a deep rot in our society. Those are the two tragedies. Incidentally, they were taking other people's place. And incidentally, this is just sort of the part of the corruption that sticks out from the, its little peak out of the water.
On the whole other low end of it, there's the whole test prep industry too. Like
exactly
every single step of the way, this is a loaded legacy mission, which literally is feudalistic, all the way through the criminal conspiracy of this, which is kind of hilarious, and Coen Brothers, but all the way through just the things that we take for granted. Like, I know it at a lot of elite colleges. Like, I talked to somebody once who was like, look, a third of the kids have different rules so they can take tests at different time and get extra. Like, everybody's got a psychiatrist note. Everybody has a this and a that. Everybody gets paid. Everybody has tutoring. I mean, it's a whole game that reflects all of our other social pathologies.
All right, here is a good look at the sort of the.
But you know what? Fucking affirmative action. Am I right?
Right, exactly. Trezzy McMillan Cotton was on Hayes, also with on Geerdatis, and explaining how this in many respects exposes sort of the rot that's there.
It is a rule by legacy cases. It's whatever the Greek term for that, right? I mean, that is the sort of pervert. That's where we are right now. Like, Jared Kushner is advising his father-in-law after his daddy gave a lot of money to Harvard, and God knows how Don Trump got into Wharton.
Right. What we're really seeing here is historical subtext as contemporary text, right? What these wealthy parents really wanted to buy was not just a more guaranteed point of entry into elite higher education, which with yawning wealth inequality just becomes a more valuable commodity for the few who can afford to be there. So that's what this relationship is broadly between wealth inequality and elite institutions who benefit greatly, I might add, from that wealth inequality. Wealth inequality will probably destroy access institutions, those working horse institutions that actually promoted upward mobility for poor and middle class students. But elite institutions are going to win. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing that win. But we're also seeing a culture of wealth, which Anand points out to. This is about more than money. This is about what can we get away with. And that is the insidious nature of the culture of being wealthy. It is not that their children will be fine. It is that their children will not be finer than the other children who are fine, right? There is always an additional layer of privilege and status and opportunity hoarding to be had. And in many ways, it is the entire culture of wealth that says that is what the pursuit of wealth is about. So it's about not only getting in through a guaranteed side door, but getting in a way that says you deserve to be there even knowing that you got in through the side. And that's the system in which they are trying to preserve.
Now, who could possibly, check your feed, who could possibly defend the idea that legacies should have a leg up in getting in there. That who could possibly make the case in some way that
Hell yeah, dude.
that people who, by nature of their parents or whatnot, deserve to be in these institutions that ostensibly are handing out the benefits of these institutions imprimatur to the most meritorious amongst us. I mean, who could actually say that in public? Oh, Meghan McCain, is she back from vacation?
Glad she's feeling better.
Because they were Asian. Okay, there's such a thing as legacy admissions, which means if your parents went to Brown or Harvard or UP, you can go. But it's interesting because the idea of legacy admissions is racist in nature, and I'll tell you why. It started in the 20s to keep out upwardly mobile immigrants who had started pushing for admission to elite schools. Yeah. And I think that is a very, very bad system. Legacy. Why should your kid get in because you got in? Yeah. Okay.
Well, the only thing I will say
That's
is
not
when
fair.
it comes to
I didn't have any. I was the first person in my whole family to go to college.
Military academies, my family goes back generations at the Naval Academy, and that's service to your country. So I would push back in that part of it because my grandfather, great grandfather, my brothers, they all served their country.
Yeah, but if you don't have the grades, why should you?
They did have the grades. My brother did, but I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of the fact that my family's legacy is at the Naval Academy. My father's buried there.
I'm not talking about your family. I'm talking about
legacy.
I'm talking about the policy of where legacy admissions came from.
I'm very proud of my family's legacy at the Naval Academy.
And Jews probably out of the colleges.
Well, let me say
that's what it's about.
Yeah, just one quick thing.
I gotta go.
Should they go to? My question
Pause
is,
it. I gotta just point out that Joy knows exactly what she's doing when she says keeps Jews out of the colleges. Because A, that's true. But B, Meghan McCain has got.
Where's the crying?
The people that you
I
care
thought you were
about
so
the most and you're
disturbed
so
about the
scared
Jewish
for.
people. What happened to Uncle Joe, Meghan? And by the way, I love the again. Meghan McCain not the brightest, so maybe it's a genuine confusion.
Very stupid.
Or
though.
she but even by her
a
standards, it's
defensiveness.
extraordinarily. It's not but I'm saying to literally mix when I say get rid of legacy admissions, I don't mean dig your father's grave up
and forget your family history.
Right.
Erase history.
It's not that you're not allowed to have members of the same family go to a school. It's that shouldn't be the reason why you get in. But let's continue.
My brothers, they all served their country.
Yeah, but if you don't have the grades, why should you
They did have the grades. My brother did, but I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of the fact that my family's legacy is at the Naval Academy. My father's buried there.
I'm not talking about your family. I'm talking about
legacy.
I'm talking about the policy of where legacy admissions came from.
I'm very proud of my family's legacy at the Naval Academy.
And Jews probably out of the colleges.
Well, let me say
that's what it's about.
Yeah, just one quick thing.
I gotta go.
Should they go to? My question is, will these parents go to jail? I mean, the U.S. Attorney said that there shouldn't be disparate treatment. I wonder, is the American public ready for these parents going to jail?
There are parents who are in jail for food stamp fraud. Yeah. And there are parents who are in jail for.
Yeah.
Anna Navarro nailing this.
Now, I will say
a woman in jail for 5 years for voting.
Listen, I am not making any accusation here whatsoever. I'm going to just point something out. That the person who could not distinguish between the concept of legacy admissions and the idea that you have a legacy or a family history at a university was accepted into Columbia University, one of the most elite universities in the country.
Jesus Christ.
And
that was my admissions essay for Columbia. Stop undermining the legacy of legacy. It was an argument about graves.
Do you think undermining was the term, or do you think it was stop being a hater about legacies?
Stop totally being a hater about legacies and such. That was my essay that got me into Columbia University.
I'm proud of my family.
I'm proud of my family. I'll tell you what, your pride about your family is pretty goddamn anti-Semitic. It's just really upsetting to me because after the Holocaust and after everything we've been through in this country, there's a time my grandfather had to go to City College and he could go to Harvard. And to see Meghan McCain at a very dangerous time in our country's history not be able to distinguish, pretend that she's so stupid that she doesn't understand the difference between legacy admissions and getting rid of her father's gravesite. It's just really upsetting, okay, guys? I'm going to be taking the rest of the week off.
I just hope that
Actually,
after this scandal, we realize that we must exhume almost every single body of anyone who's
destroy
kids
the records.
Go to the same school as them.
The decadence of the ruling class, folks. It really is generational because, like, you know, I don't like John McCain, but he did some things that were legitimately impressive, and she just has never had to really do anything.
It's almost like it's not genetic.
I love how, like, Joy is sitting there being like, you know, how other way this could be read, honey, I have a career that I created on my own, and I sit across from you while you talk absolute nonsense and are an entitled idiot every single day of the week. And I'm wondering, as with college admissions, why do I have to go through this? And is there a much more talented person who has merit who could be sitting in your chair and making a better show for everybody?
Abby Huntsman went to University of Pennsylvania, by the way.
Yeah, but again, Abby Huntsman definitely, like, we only do clips, but she seems to have a much better understanding of, like, whole life handed to you by parents. I'm going to step back a little bit on this.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Incidentally, I mean, is there, you know, Donald Trump is a perfect example of all of this, right? I mean, we have a president who is there, and in some respects, I mean, this is, what...
John Huntsman also went to University of Pennsylvania.
Oh, shocking.
Oh, no, that's unbelievable.
What Tressie Cotton said was that we are seeing the subtext of our society played out in the text, which is exactly the way that people describe Donald Trump. And not, I mean, coincidentally, but perhaps not so coincidentally, you know, Donald Trump, of course, also bought his way in, just like his son-in-law, into college. And that is aside from, like Michael says, all of the filters that get you in a position to apply and get into college, even if that doesn't involve your parents paying any money to the college, ranging not just from, SAT prep, but the ability to live in or be born into a location that has a decent public school, or your parents, paying for a private school, and on like this. And the limitations of just even the concept of meritocracy in a society, particularly as disparate as ours, is ridiculous. But
is it true that John McCain did graduate at the bottom of his class too, like Trump?
Yeah, he says that all the time.
All right, I retract my comments on John McCain. Nothing he's ever done is impressive.
Well, I mean, I think I'm sure that
he literally engaged in physical. I mean, on behalf of a fucking genocide. So it's not a moral claim, but yes. He flew planes. He was tortured.
He got off his ass.
Meghan McCain
many
has
more times
literally
than
done
she
nothing
has.
in her life of any even note. We
That's
don't have
all,
to use
that's
the
all
word
I'm
merit.
saying. I'm not saying the things he did were good.
I would stand by your statement.
He did
You're
do
right. It's
some
not
things,
a moral claim.
and she has never done anything.
She did appear as a guest on Have I Got News for You, one of the pilots that did for. So that was tricky. We had to get there at like 4 p.m.
She married a Federalist writer too.
Oh, that's right.
Oh wow,
Forgot about that guy.
I'm so jealous now. Just a reminder. I'm going on The View. I'm owning Meghan McCain. This is happening. Let's all envision it together.
Oh, I see. I thought you were actually announcing that.
No, but yes, in a way.
There's two things, a piece of legislation that you should be aware of that are going on right now. One is that the Republicans are looking to pass what ostensibly sounds like an attempt to regain authority for Congress. And that is Senator Mike Lee is drafting some type of legislation for Congress ostensibly to claw back the emergency powers that the Congress has given to the president. But the fact is that Congress doesn't need to do that. Congress could prevent President Trump from getting the money to build this wall by taking it from things like the military pension, et cetera, et cetera. But they're not going to do that because they're so afraid of Donald Trump. What they are going to do is fashion a piece of legislation that allows Donald Trump to do it this one time, but will prevent future presidents from doing it when there is a Democratic president. I don't know if that's going to succeed, but it is an attempt to head off Republicans who are voting to limit the president's ability to do this. Meanwhile, there's another piece of legislation that is called the Cradle Act. And essentially what this is a piece of legislation that is aimed, I think, at destroying Social Security. The biggest failure in pensions in 30 or 40 years has been the experiment to do 401ks. These are not defined benefit pensions, but defined contribution pensions. In other words, you got to pay in a certain amount. And the problem with these are that, one, people have access to this money. They pull it out in times of emergency rather than saving. Two, they don't contribute in the first place. So the way that they want to undercut Social Security is by making it an ineffective social insurance. This is what social insurance is. You cannot access this money until the triggering event happens. You cannot pay into fire insurance and pull the money out because I haven't gotten, there hasn't been a fire in my house. And then if a fire comes, I have no home and I have no ability to get another home. This is what they want to do, and they're couching it as if it's providing flexibility for people as opposed to addressing the needs that people have in real time.
I think most people would look at this as an opportunity that they might not otherwise have, an opportunity to benefit from payments that they've been making already for years.
Why is the U.S. so far behind the rest of the industrialized world on this issue?
Well, I think that is a really great question, and that's why we have decided now is the time to step up and really do something about this. We think it's time to catch up with other countries.
I don't even know, there is the idea that this is somehow us catching up to other countries to allow people to raid because the questioner is questioning this in terms of leaving for maternal or paternal leave or other sort of events like this where we as a nation do not provide support for people in that way. Our guest in Holland, they do this. They do this in Germany. They do it throughout Europe. They give you paid vacation when you have a loved one that is ill. You get paid vacation or time off with the maternity and paternity leave. We're not catching up because we're raiding our retirement pensions, our retirement insurance that says, I'm going to pay into this as a society to make sure that we're not leaving our elderly in poverty. That's what this is. That's what we're insuring against. We're insuring against massive rates of poverty for our elderly. We're insuring against burdens that would be placed on children of parents who might be living in poverty. That is what we're doing, to raid that and allow people to raid that as opposed to just as a government. If we think this is an important value, to support people when they take time off to be a mother or a father, or they take time off to care for a loved one, we should fund it because the rest of the world does.
Yeah, if anything, other countries are trying to catch up with us right now, like the Mad King of France raising people's retirement age, etc. The neoliberal governments of Europe, they are looking at that and they're trying to catch up with us in terms of throwing old people out on their asses.
That's true. The bottom line, this Republican legislation, do not be taken in by it. Not good. Let's go to some IMs. I don't think we're going to get to any calls today because we get not too much time. But Snowfake, Matt's Dave Rubin impression is presciently close to sounding like Cartman from South Park.
It's Mike Racine's.
Be silly. To the Fox audience, any amount of grossness or stupidity can be completely masked by a nicely clipped, earnest-sounding, authoritative white person speaking effect. Drake Holmes. Sam, can you please have someone on to discuss the YIMBY movement? It's becoming a thing here in D.C. and suburban Maryland. I'm skeptical of its intentions and its necessity. For one, I don't think everyone does well living in high-density areas. I think a little distance is good for our well-being, and I think technology increasing makes commuting unnecessary. YIMBY is what?
Yes, in my backyard.
I see.
I guess it's a movement to build more housing developments.
Yes, and to build upwards, I think. I think
density is generally good.
I think density is generally good. There's always the opportunity to move to the suburbs. Theoretically, this would make it easier if it's really important, but if you think that distance is good for well-being, it's
definitely not good for climate.
It's not good for
like
climate.
It says technology makes the commute a smaller problem, but I mean suburbs are such a huge problem when it comes to like climate and.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would just make sure that the developments being built are not luxury developments, but have some measure of affordable housing.
Give me space.
Water boat from Kashmir. Rutger Bregman, Michael Dell, Howard Schultz walk into a Starbucks. Rutger Bregman says, poverty is a lack of cash. Michael Dell says, poverty is a lack of philanthropy. Howard Schultz says, poverty is a lack of imagination. Bregman chokes Michael Dell, figuratively speaking, of course. I don't get it. 8 Square. Hello, MR was traveling now and playing catch up on shows. MR killing it, and today with Rutger. Sam, how gratifying to see you on Hayes last night in a longer segment. And then McMillan Cotton, who you introduced many to us in a January interview. I'm convinced Hayes has a producer whose job it is to listen to MR. The DX Fool. Hello, Sandinistas. Do you, if Peter Thiel is involved with this Tucker tape dump, since it was Bubba that blackmailed former entertainer Hulk Hogan with a sex tape that he passed on to Gawker, which Hogan and his friend Thiel bankrupt by suing them for slander?
I'm a little tired of Tucker's fascist populism.
I don't understand.
Bubba the Love Sponge is the reason that Gawker is bankrupt.
I didn't know that.
He is the one. Yeah, Hulk Hogan cucked Bubba the Love Sponge. And there's a video of it, which Gawker, for some, I'm a big Gawker defender, but I have to say, for some, just like, why would you do that reason, posted this video that no one would want to see. And then Peter Thiel secretly funded the Hulk Hogan lawsuit.
Well, but he did that as a sort of like a sock puppet to attack
as revenge
Gawker.
to Gawker for outing him. Because it undermined his deals with the Saudis and Emiratis would be my guess.
Street Legal comes up with the point. Civilization was literally invented in Iraq, which is true. They call that either the cradle of civilization. Is that what they... Bull Prague. Joni Ernst and Mike Lee are proposing Cradle Act, yes, where parents get paid leave by borrowing from their Social Security savings and then postponing retirement to pay it back. There's going to be a full CBS. Yes, well, we did it. Skip that last IM. Wool and Akbar have the same lawyer as Gavin McInnes, according to the address on that police report. Wow.
Whoa. Well, I think then the Southern Poverty Law Center can be sitting a little bit more easy.
There you go. Tim Apple, he's going to be busy. Tim Apple, I need to set the record straight. The fake news machine and people like you are obsessed with celebrities, so much so that you ignore average people like me. Our heroic President Trump wasn't addressing Tim Cook. He was addressing me, Tim Apple, your average beer-drinking American. Not clever username. Sam just signed up for a membership today. Love you and the whole team. Wish you were on a talk radio station in every market. We'd all be better off for it. Talk radio is slowly dying on the vine, I think. The same jerks that argue against Me Too, saying, what if someone files a fake report, retweet Jacob Wall after he files back-to-back actual false police reports? How long until Boof Kavanaugh says Ruth sent him death threats from the hospital? Lead me. Wealth correlates to K-12 funding and test prep, which correlates to college admission. This will be true without scams and free college. This is why free college before and without K-12 funding leveling will increase wealth and income inequality. Free college is uniquely popular with the relatively privileged. That's a good point.
Well, we should also bring back an open admissions policy like they used to have at CUNY.
That's, I would imagine, also true. And we really do need a universal pre-K and a better way of funding K through 12. As a professor, I cannot possibly cure 12 plus years of an educational deficit, even if my students don't have to pay to sit in my classes. That is also part of the problem, even that an open admissions doesn't necessarily solve.
We need redistribution to solve these problems as well.
JB, dear Speaker Pelosi, we're already divided. Please get a clue.
True.
Holy crap, John McCain only got into the Naval Academy because of his father. Check that with Schechter. I think that is true. You can find that in The Real McCain, written by Cliff Schechter. Here's what Lori Laughlin's daughter said on her YouTube channel before she was attending USC. I don't know how much of my school I'm going to attend, but I'm going to go in and talk to my deans and everyone, hope that I can try and balance it at all. But I do want the experience of like game days, partying. I really don't care about school, as all you guys know. Having been exposed to Bigley for taking campaign contributions in exchange for ignoring Trump's flagrant crimes, Cy Vance is a little more motivated than usual to make big charges stick against Trump minions. Look for Trump to withhold pardon until after Manafort has undermined the state case. If he sings for Vance, he does his federal time. Dr. Chaos MD, schools that routinely accept bribes for students' admissions or ones that favor legacy over merit in their admissions process are far more likely to donate to a school. Legacies are far more likely to donate to a school after graduation. Should have public funding revoked and lose their accreditation. If you accept a bribe for admission, who's going to say that you wouldn't accept a bribe for favorable grades? And if that's the case, then your diplomas are meaningless. Well, the schools are making it like they had no idea that this was all sort of like, and it's possible, but I find it hard to believe.
I don't like this season of Full House.
Chris Burdick, I got into USC after rejected by literally every other college I applied to. So, yeah, maybe not the hardest school to get into. Senator Lobachair. Laura Luma loudly locks limbs for lunatic liberty, leaving laxa less. Okay. Doe. FAA opts against grounding Boeing 737 after second crash. Eesh. Guidanera, this is brilliant. It's part of the point of writing passing bills you know will fail. She should be chair of the DOC. I don't know what the DOC is, but we'll check it out. Nick from Manitoba. Hey, Mr. Seder, great show today. I got a friend who started bringing up race realism with me recently. I asked if it was because he read or something, have heard of the bell curve. He said, nah, Charles Murray's too smart for him. Genital strike. McCain didn't so much fly his planes as crash them several times. Cucker Tolson. Anyone seen Tim Pool versus Jack Dorsey on Joe Rogan? That Pool kid is such a whiny. Frankie B. Hey, Sam, I come from a military background. I can assure you that military service academies are filled with entitled legacy students just as much as any other organization. Melissa Meaner. I don't know if any of you guys listen to true crime podcasts, but there's been drama lately because this one, popular podcaster, makes $70K a month on Patreon, has been dropped from his network after making a disgusting, violent, misogynist post on Instagram. He also creeps on his fans and asks women to send nudes, berates anyone who criticizes him, and generally disgusting. He's having a very public meltdown right now, blaming SJWs for his takedown. Surprise, surprise, he's a big fan of Dave Rubin and Jordan Peterson. And not could you, how about some beers or a bottle of tequila for membership? Christo, my father knew John McCain while attending the Naval Academy, remembers him as an F-up who would have been kicked out numerous times had his dad and granddad not been admirals. And the final, we got three more. Sizzy Chest, this is petty, but Tucker defining people as civilized because they use toilet paper is ridiculous. Get yourself a $20 bidet attachment and join the future.
Yeah, toilet paper is technically pretty unhygienic.
Kentucky Fried Comrade. Conversations about MMT versus market and econ are badly framed. They aren't in opposition and both use different fundamental frameworks. Marxism is a critique of capitalism and structural nature, while MMT is offering a policy set based of a reaction to mainstream economic consensus. I don't think it's a policy set. I think it's an assessment, an analysis that may lead to certain policies. And the final I am of the day. This is not a good final one. Hey, MR Crew, I'm going to have some time to read over the next few weeks. If you guys had to pick one, what book would you recommend? I mean, that Tressie McMillan Cottom book is really good. But if you want one that's like an easy read and sort of hopeful, this Utopia for Realists is pretty fun.
And if you'd rather read a fictional utopia, read the Mars trilogy by Kim Stanley Robinson and then listen to our interview with him on the Antifada.
Ghost Wars by Steve Cole.
That's fine with me. Ghost Wars.
All right, folks. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow